The last message begins in silence. The hospital was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that whispers endings. It was May 11th, 1981. Bob Marley, barely 36 years old, lay in a Miami clinic, thin and pale, his dreadlocks resting like the roots of a tree cut too soon. Around him, doctors whispered, family prayed, and friends waited for a miracle that wouldn't come. But Bob wasn't afraid. He had already seen what most of us never dare to face. He had walked through Babylon with his eyes open. He had danced with the fire of prophecy, sung to the soul of the earth, and challenged systems far larger than himself. And now, with cancer claiming his body, he had only one thing left to give, his final message. That message, that prophecy, wasn't broadcast. It wasn't written in a song or shouted into a microphone. No, it was whispered to someone close, to someone who remembers. But the world, as always, tried to bury it. Bob Marley never believed death was the end. He saw life as a cycle and the spirit as something that passed through time, not bound by it. His connection to the Rastafari faith was more than cultural. It was prophetic. Marley often spoke of Zion, the promised land. He spoke of Africa's awakening, of Babylon falling, of the spiritual war we were all already living, whether we accepted it or not. And so, as he lay dying, those who were with him say that Bob looked beyond the room. He wasn't seeing the ceiling. He wasn't watching the four-tube drip. He was seeing the future. There are rumors, persistent, strange rumors, that in his final conscious hours, Bob Marley spoke of a great shaking to come, a shaking not of buildings, but of hearts. He said the world would forget the message of unity unless it was reborn through fire. He warned that music would become hollow, that rebellion would be turned into entertainment, that love would be sold in pieces, rebranded and sterilized, and worst of all, that truth would be disguised as opinion. It was a prophecy that wasn't meant to be published. It was meant to be remembered by those with ears to hear. One of his sons, close to the room, said that Bob whispered, "Don't forget Jah. Don't let them wash Zion from your heart. Even if my voice is silent, the storm is not done." Those words ... they haunt, because since his death, much of what he feared has come true. Reggae became commercial. The struggle became merchandise. Revolution got diluted. And Zion? Zion got silenced in many hearts. And yet, something remains. Maybe it's in the melody of Redemption Song. Maybe it's in the vibration of Get Up, Stand Up. Maybe it's in the silence between the notes. But something survived. Something that refuses to die. Bob Marley didn't want to be a prophet. He wanted to be a man singing truth. But prophets don't get to choose. They get chosen. The voice that saw beyond fame Bob Marley was never just a star. Fame found him, but he always walked on the fringes of it. While the world saw stages, gold records, and crowds, Bob saw invisible chains. He spoke of freedom, but not the freedom of television commercials. He spoke of an inner, ancestral freedom, linked to the spirit, a liberation that didn't sell, but burned. And that's why his words still resonate so strongly today, because Bob didn't sing to please. He sang to wake up. When Marley traveled to Africa in 1978, he didn't just go for a show. He went in search of the soul. In the heart of Ethiopia, between conversations with elders and staring at the hills of Shukshimane, he said he felt something that would haunt him until the end, the confirmation that the spiritual struggle was intensifying. Zion is not just a place, he once said, it is a state of the soul. This phrase was lost in scattered interviews, but those who heard it knew. Bob was saying that paradise would not come from the heavens, it would come from within. And that was frightening, because a man who understands this, who lives this, becomes dangerous to those who profit from collective ignorance. It is no wonder that his cancer appeared in a mysterious way. A simple bruise on his big toe, which grew, spread, and killed one of the greatest icons of music without giving him time to react. Many call it a coincidence. Others call it divine punishment. But there are those who speak of something different, something planned. Yes, There are theories, those that circulate only behind the scenes in unpublished memoirs. People close to Marley said that he feared he was being tracked, that there were eyes on him, that his message of spiritual unification, of returning to Africa, of freedom that did not depend on politics or church, was being watched. Bob knew that the more truth he spoke, the more doors closed around him, but he never backed down. Not even when he was attacked in 1976 inside his own home and was shot twice, once in the arm and once in the chest. The next day, bleeding, he went on stage at the Peace concert, and when asked why he didn't give up, he said, "The people who are trying to make this world worse aren't taking a day off. How can I?" This phrase, recorded in poor quality on a tape that was almost lost, is more than an argument. It is an oath, a vow of fidelity to the mission. And here is the key to the final prophecy. Bob Marley believed that his life was not his. It was Jah's. It belonged to something greater. He was simply lending his body to circulate the message. In the last months of his life, when the cancer had already invaded his brain and bones, he wrote fragments of thoughts in notebooks. Many were lost, some were burned, others were kept by his family. But there are excerpts that have leaked. In one of them, Marley wrote, "They will try to keep my songs, but not my silence. The silence will speak louder in the last days." Silence. Not music, not speeches. Silence. This was the most feared prophecy, that when everything turned to noise, politics, marketing, religion, online fights, only silence would carry the truth. Only silence would remind us that we were created for more than consumption, and Bob knew that his death would hasten that. The breath that comes from Zion, there was a night. Shortly before Bob was rushed to Miami, when he went out alone into the garden of a house in Kingston, he walked with difficulty, his skin as thin as paper, his eyes sunken and slow. But there was a glow, the glow that never left him. One of the musicians in the band, who asked not to be identified, said he saw Marley kneeling in the dirt, his hands buried in the grass, muttering words in ancient patois. He kept repeating a phrase, "Zion na dead, Babylon soon fall." That night was etched in the memory of those who witnessed it, because there was no posing, no show. There was just a man and his God, a man who had already understood that he would not live much longer, but who, even so, was not in despair. On the contrary, he smiled, because Bob believed that death was not an end, but a return, and that the return to Zion for the righteous was inevitable. In the Rastafarian tradition, the world is divided into two great spiritual blocks. Zion, the promised land, which is not only physical, but represents purity, communion with the Creator and elevated consciousness, and Babylon, the system of oppression, selfishness, lies, and corrupt power. Bob Marley sang about this tirelessly, but not as someone who just denounces it, as someone who sees it. He said that many were already living in Zion and didn't even know it. Others were drowning in Babylon, even inside churches. In what became just phrases on t-shirts, he saw revelations. In each of his songs, there are layers, hidden messages, warnings for those who have eyes to see. When Marley sang "Emancipate Yourselves from Mental Slavery," he wasn't just talking about colonialism or racism. He was talking about the invisible prison of the mind, the same one that today hides on screens, in speeches of fear, and silent vices. He foresaw this. There is a forgotten passage from a 1979 radio interview where the journalist asks, "Bob, what happens after death?" And Marley answers, laughing, "You don't die if your heart never leaves Zion." This answer, simple and enigmatic, carries a code. The code of someone who no longer feared the end because he never lived for himself. And this was the part that the system never understood about Bob Marley. He didn't want success. He wanted the survival of his soul. And that soul, he gave it away in every chord, in every verse. It was his offering. During his last days in Miami, his son Ziggy says that Bob Marley refused to sleep for long. He was afraid of missing something important, as he said. It was as if he was waiting for a sign, a last moment, a vision, or maybe a visitor. There are strange stories about those nights. People close to him said that for 2 days in a row, Bob asked for the window to be left open, even with the cold air of the hospital, and that he was talking in a low voice to someone no one could see. They asked him if he was hallucinating, and he simply replied, "No man. Spirit a come. Me happy listen. The spirit comes. I need to listen." That phrase never left the head of the nurse who was with him that night. She, who was not even religious, said that something in the air got heavy, but not bad, intense, like the room was filled with a presence. Bob was talking to something beyond this world, and again he whispered, only this time crying. Bob Marley's tears were not of fear. They were of gratitude, of beauty, of relief. He knew his mission was over, but that the message would not die, as long as someone listened to it, as long as someone told it, as long as someone remembered that what he said was real. The last voice, May 11th, dawned strange. It was sunny in Miami, but the entire hospital seemed shrouded in an emotional haze. It wasn't just about Bob's health. It was as if everyone knew, even without saying it, that something was about to end, or starting. The nurse entered the room early. Marley was awake, but he wasn't talking much. His eyes, even though weak, still had that silent light of someone who sees what others cannot. Beside the bed were his wife Rita, 2 of his children, and an old childhood friend who preferred not to be named in the reports. Bob looked at each one serenely, as if he wanted to engrave their faces into eternity. It was at that moment that he asked for silence. In a barely audible voice he murmured, "I'm leaving soon. But listen, it's not done yet. I'll go soon. But listen, Jah is not finished." These words were spoken without fear, without despair, as a warning, as if he were saying goodbye, but also delivering a task. And then, with his eyes fixed on an invisible point above you, he began to whisper. No one heard everything. Words were lost between heavy breathing and the buzzing of the machines. But some of what he said was written down. Part of it remained alive in the souvenirs. Among the loose phrases were, "Music will be used against love. Dem will wear my colors but forget the fire. A love will be rebranded, me tell you. But truth is lava. Rise again." These words were never published in newspapers. They were never read in official biographies. But they leaked, and they spread like silent seeds. Many thought it was an invention, exaggeration, myth created to maintain the mystique. But for those who were there, it was real. Bob Marley knew what was coming. He knew his face would become a symbol, that their songs would become commercial soundtracks, that his revolution would be transformed into teenage bedroom decor. He could see right there what Babylon would do with his message. But he also saw beyond, and he left a code, a secret embedded in the very nature of his music. Because, as he said, my words are not sound only, them is door. My words are not just sound, they are door. Door for what? For an awakening. For an invisible war that he always warned about. For a spiritual return to a consciousness that Babylon tried to kill. As his eyes began to close for the last time, Rita approached. Bob, almost without strength, held his hand. I didn't say bye or I love you. What he whispered was, money can't buy life. These words made headlines. They were repeated all over the world, but the media ignored the rest. Ignored what came before. Ignored the prophecy. He ignored the whisper about the truth that never dies, even when the body falls silent. And maybe it was on purpose. Because Marley didn't want his message to be interpreted. I wanted it to be felt, and feeling requires silence. It requires a break, demands delivery. Medical records will say that Bob Marley died of widespread cancer, but those who were with him will say something else. He didn't die. He left with his mission accomplished. He turned into fire. He turned into wind. He became an echo. And now that echo resurfaces here, in this channel, in this story, in this memory. Burying the wrong voice a few hours after Bob Marley's death, The Miami hospital was surrounded by silence, but not the respectful silence of natural mourning. It was an uneasy silence, almost coordinated. People were told not to speak to the press. Some notes disappeared. Other documents were filed away from journalists. What was supposed to be a hero's farewell suddenly became a secret shared by few. The family, still in shock, did not understand right away. But as the days went by, questions began to arise. Fragments of what Marley had said in his final moments did not match the official notes. A nurse was removed. One of the files with records of the room was lost, and the recordings? Some existed. Rumors speak of a small tape recorder left by a friend that captured part of Bob's last words. But the audio was allegedly confiscated by people outside the family and disappeared. The version that reached the world was an isolated phrase. Money can't buy life. It was beautiful, moving, simple to understand, and for that very reason, harmless. It was perfect for newspapers. It was perfect for books. But it was just the shell, the seed, the prophecy that remained inside, locked away. When Marley's body was taken to Jamaica, the government prepared a state funeral. Thousands took to the streets. They cried. They sang, but they didn't know that something was missing. Among the objects placed in the coffin, a Bible, a Gibson Les Paul guitar, and a branch of ganja. There was also an envelope, sealed. No one knows for sure what was inside. But Ziggy Marley, years later, declared in an interview, "My father wrote something before he passed. I've never read it. It's locked away. But I dream about it." 3 words that never left the brothers' heads. He knew already. Bob already knew. He knew all this would happen. He knew that after his death, there would be an attempt to turn his flame into smoke. He knew that his voice would be used by those who never listened, and that his image would be worshipped by those who did not understand his pain. And that is why he acted before. Bob Marley did not trust systems, neither religious, nor political, nor family. He trusted code songs, songs with multiple layers like spiritual traps. And he spread these traps throughout his albums. In So Much Things to Say, there is a line that few have noticed. I'll never forget no way they crucified Jesus Christ. But he sings it with a tone of warning, not of remembrance. As if to say, they're doing it again, and they're going to do it to me too. After the burial, several manuscripts were collected from the house where Marley spent his last months. Some disappeared. Others were censored by the family itself. Fear, perhaps, or protection. A former Whalers member said that there were pages where Bob wrote about the new slavery that would come through distraction, not chains. He called it digital Babylon. This term appeared long before the internet became what it is today. He spoke of silenced voices, soulless music, fake revolutions. And at the bottom of the page he wrote, "Truth is not safe, but it's the only road to Zion." The question that remains is, if Bob Marley was a prophet, why was his prophecy buried? The answer may not lie in the world's fear, but in people's difficulty in accepting that his mission continues, that Marley's spirit still demands something of us. The words they wanted to cut, Bob Marley wrote songs like someone who sculpts revelations. Each verse was more than poetry. It was a map, a sign, an answer. But not all of the answers reached us, because between the studio and the final album, someone decided what could and what could not be heard. During the production of the album Uprising, 1980, one of the last of Bob's life, there were silent conflicts with the executives at Island Records. The reason? Sections that were too spiritual, too direct, or politically dangerous. According to a sound engineer at the time, there were cuts on tracks like We and Dem and Forever Loving Jah, subtle, second-long cuts. But they changed the tone of the message. In one of the sections removed from the original recording of We and Dem, Marley is said to have sung, "The fire is near, the war is spirit, not flesh. They sit in chairs, but Jah prepares the storm." That line was never officially released. It was cut before the final mix. The alleged reason? Track time. But insiders say something else. Fear. feared that Marley was getting too close to the role of prophet, and he knew it. In interviews that year, Bob seemed restless. He looked around. He chose his words more carefully, but every now and then he would blurt out, "Me not just a singer, you know? It's prophecy we bringing. It's Babylon we warning." In another conversation, recorded in a notebook, he wrote, "They fear the songs, not the singer, 'cause I can die, but the melody, it spreads." And that was his secret weapon. He turned warning into harmony, truth into chorus. But not everyone was ready for the whole truth. One of the tracks most symbolic of this dilemma is Redemption Song. Marley composed this song alone, at home, already feeling the effects of cancer. It was his rawest song, just voice and guitar, a spiritual testament, a conscious farewell. But there is something that few know. The original draft of Redemption Song had additional verses, excerpts that spoke directly about signs of the times, the fall of the system and the false love sold by the world. These verses were never recorded. There are rumors that Marley was advised not to include them. Rumors say, "Keep it clean, Bob. People want hope, not fear." But Bob didn't want to sell decorative hope. He wanted to set people on fire. The curious thing is that even the lyrics that reach the public carry hidden codes, specific repetitions, ancestral words from the Jamaican dialect with double spiritual meanings, references to little-known biblical passages. For example, in the song Exodus, when Marley sings, "Movement of Jah people," he is not just talking about African migration. He is announcing a spiritual exodus, an internal break with Babylon. In live shows, he would spontaneously modify the lyrics saying, "This is the last warning. Don't wait for sky to break. Break Babylon now." These moments did not make it onto the record. They are lost in amateur tapes, pirated recordings, and in the memories of those who witnessed them. It is as if Bob Marley was fighting, until the end, to leave clues, to draw with chords a map that could be read when the world was ready, but the world was not, and perhaps it still isn't. That is why this prophecy still lives, silent, scattered, waiting for attentive hearts. And perhaps that is why you are here now. Meetings that were not recorded. Shortly before he fell seriously ill, Bob Marley made a series of trips that are not included in many official records. One of them was to Ethiopia, which he considered the sacred land, the birthplace of Zion. But what really happened there, few know for sure. Sources close to him claim that Marley met with Rastafarian elders, spiritual leaders of the Shakespearean community. There, he spent days in complete silence, meditating, participating in rituals based on fire, smoking, and reading Ethiopian scriptures. There were no cameras. There was no press. There was only Marley, and something he would later call a vision in the spirit. According to reports, during one of these meetings, Bob was taken to an ancient stone temple. There, one of the elders is said to have told him, "Your voice is a trumpet, but a trumpet of warning. You will not see Babylon fall, but you will sing its collapse." That phrase never left his mind. He returned to Jamaica in silence, reclusive. He wrote on pads of paper all the time, but kept everything hidden from view. He began to write less about love and more about resistance. Less about dance, more about the end of a cycle. Another little-known episode happened in London in 1977. After a performance, Marley allegedly met a man known only as the Prophet, an African immigrant who lived on the streets and claimed to speak to his ancestors. At first, Bob laughed, but when he sat down with the man, something changed. They talked for hours. At one point, the man held Marley's hand and said, "You carry the fire, but fire has cost. They won't kill your body. They will try to kill your echo." Days later, Bob would write on the back of a sheet of music, "The echo must be protected." This concept of echo began to appear in his speeches, interviews, lyrics. He already understood that the greatest risk was not to die, but to be forgotten in a distorted way. On another occasion, in the late 1980s, Bob went to the interior of Ghana, where he spent 3 days in a village without electricity, living with descendants of Ashanti warriors. There, he heard stories of kings who spoke to the sky, of dreams of smoke snakes that covered the world, and of a time when true voices would be suffocated by technology, entertainment, and fear. Marley listened to it all in silence. And that night, he wrote, "Soon the loudest voice will be fake. Only those who whisper with truth will survive." That's why his last shows were different. There was an urgency in his eyes, a rush, as if each song was a call, a spiritual siren trying to wake up those who were still sleeping. And perhaps the most impressive moment happened on his deathbed, when, according to his wife Rita, Marley looked up at the ceiling and said, "Jah, send the rider. It's time now." This phrase to this day is interpreted by Rastafarian theologians as a reference to the horsemen of the apocalypse. Bob believed that we were entering a time when Babylon would fall, not by war, but by moral, spiritual, and social collapse. And so, his mission was to warn, but to warn with beauty, with melody, with vibration, with love that burns, with fire that heals. Many today sing Marley without knowing that they are prophesying with him. They repeat the choruses without realizing that they are chanting coded messages about a world that has not yet arrived, but is coming. The theft of fire, Bob Marley's death, was not the end of his influence. It was the beginning of a silent struggle over his legacy, a struggle over his copyright, his image, his phrases, his voice, and most importantly, over how he would be remembered. Soon after his funeral, major record companies and business groups began to make their move. T-shirts, posters, mugs, lighters, perfumes, flags, caps, rugs, all with Marley's face, but not all with his message. In the first 5 years after his death, it is estimated that more than 300 licensed products bearing the Bob Marley name were put on the market, many of them without the direct approval of the family. Several completely removed any reference to Jah, Rastafari, or prophecy. They kept only the symbol, the smiling face, the colorful flag, the one love isolated from the rest of the phrase. Bob was transformed into a pop icon, and his echo began to be muffled. What was supposed to be a call became a prop. What was supposed to be a shout became a party chorus. In advertisements, they used his music to sell products that he would never have played. His most profound phrases were simplified, cut out, taken out of context. "Don't worry, be happy." A phrase that was never his became associated with his face. The confusion was intentional. It was Babylon at work. As he himself prophesied, "Dem will wear my colors but forget the fire." And that's exactly what they did. They took the colors. They stole the chords, but they erased the urgency. The Marley family, realizing the exploitation, tried to regain control. The Tough Gong Foundation was created to preserve his legacy. But even then, it was too late. The world had already decided which version of Bob Marley it wanted to remember. The safe version, the sellable version, the version that doesn't bother. The real Marley, the one who said that governments lie, that religious leaders corrupt, that love is action and not speech, he was slowly silenced. Videos of him were removed for violating guidelines. Excerpts of interviews disappeared. Intense speeches on stage were cut from official documentaries. It was as if they were saying, "We want your music, but we don't want your soul." But Marley's soul never sold out. It hid in the original lyrics, in tapes of old concerts, in the eyes of those who were with him, in the fragments kept by his children, in the verses that still hurt because they are so true, and perhaps more than anywhere else, it hid in us, in those who still listen, in those who still feel, in those who are not interested in a product, but in a mission, because, as Marley wrote, the fire they bury grows in the roots, and those roots still grow, silent, slow, deep. When the prophecy begins to burn, Bob Marley didn't say that the world would end in literal fire. He was talking about another kind of fire, the fire of consciousness. And this fire began to spread exactly as he predicted, in silence, on the margins, in seeds that sprout in the midst of chaos. Just look around. We live in a time where music has become an algorithm, where rebellion has become fashion, where protest is choreography, where the truth is muffled by versions, where the powerful, now more smiling, use the word freedom as bait. And while everything seems light, beautiful, controlled, Bob had already warned. The loudest lies were the face of love. He saw that the problem was not evil disguised as evil, but evil disguised as good. The system that tires us, exhausts us, and then sells as medicine the same poison that caused the pain. And that is why today, more than ever, his message makes sense. When we see young people shouting in the streets for justice, but being ignored by the headlines, when we see musicians being canceled for telling painful truths, when we see spirituality being replaced by emotional consumption, when silence becomes resistance, Marley's prophecy burns in each of these scenes. He said that Zion would not come with helicopters, nor with presidents. Zion would come with an inner awakening, with ordinary people, with those who refuse the deep sleep of distraction. Some current artists, consciously or not, have begun to echo Marley's soul. Not those who copy his style, but those who share his spirit. Voices that do not sing to climb the rankings, but to warn. Channels, films, poems, graffiti, all of these have carried fragments of what Bob left, seeds activated in other generations. And there is something even stronger: refusal. The refusal of young people who do not accept the imposed system, who leave empty careers, who return to planting, to meditating, to listening, who are not content to live on autopilot. This silent movement is Zion being born. But make no mistake, Babylon has also evolved. Now it smiles, it personalizes, it rewards those who adapt, and isolates those who awaken. Bob knew that the world would not listen immediately. That is why he prepared the future with melodies of resistance, with hidden words, with invisible codes that would only be revealed at the right time. And maybe that time is now. If you are watching this, it is not by chance. Maybe you are already feeling the fire. Maybe the prophecy is already burning within you. Maybe Marley is not dead. Maybe he is speaking now through your conscience. One love now era eso macancao to dus cantum one love. Festas. Casamenos. Anchos de refrigerante. Mas pucos antendem oq Bob Marley quis dizer de verdade. Porque one love now era eso uma musica alegre. Era código. Era uma convocaca espiritual. Era uma provocaca para os tempos de fim. A letra pergunta, is there a place for the hopeless sinner who has hurt all mankind just to save his own? Mas quais ninguém escuta essa parte. Prefrem cantar o refrão. Esquisram da pergunta. Esquisram que Marley não queria que apenas sentíssimos. El queria que decidíssimos. One love era o teste. Era a armadilha sagrada. El cantava amor. Para revelar o falso. Nas seus últimos momentos, Marley teria dito a phrase que muitos tentam ignorar ad hoc. If one love doesn't hurt you a little, you're not ready. El dizia que amar de verdade exige abandonar o ego, exige romper como sistema, exige dizer não ao mundo, mesmo que todos a seu redor digam sim. E por isso, one love era também uma profecia, porque o mundo ia usar essa canca para anestesiar, para decorar, para comercializar. Mas aqueles que senissem, aqueles que realmente entendissem, esses seriam chamados. Bob Marley morreu como homem don, mas renasceu como uma chama que ninguém consegue apagar. E essa chama hoje se reacende, não em palcos, mas em almas. Não em discos, mas em silencios. A profecia que el sachero antes de partir, não era um aviso de destruir cá, era uma chave. Uma phrase dita como voz fraca, mas carregada de fogo. Love without fire is not love. Truth
If they
without
bury my
pain
voice,
is not truth.
they will wake my storm.
Essa phrase fico ecoando, e talvez esteja ecoando agora em boca Se voca escutu aqui, e porc santo. Porc o espírito de Marley atravessou as camadas do tempo e da destruição, e chegou et voca. Por isso, agaria suaves, se essa história te su coração. Dexu like, não como clique qualquer, mas como ata de resistência espiritual. Se voca acredita que Bob Marley não morreu, apenas mudou de forma. Inscreva-se no canal One Love Stories. Voca será parte dessa chama que ainda precisa ardor. E nos comentários escreva. The echo must be protected. Oh, say Quiser, apenas. I still hear the whisper. Ajude essa profecia a continuar viva. O mundo de barulho de me. Agora, e hora de escutar o sussurro. One love, one truth, one fire.